When we hear the word bankrupt, our minds usually jump to a person losing their home or maybe a company shutting its doors for good. But what does it even mean for an entire country to go bankrupt? I mean, you can't exactly evict a nation, right? The flag's still gonna fly. So what's really happening under the surface when a country can't pay its bills? Let's get into it.
And right away, you can see the difference is just massive. A person can have all their assets seized, they can lose everything. But a country, well, it's still there. The land, the people, the government buildings, none of that just vanishes. The real collapse is something you can't see, but it's way, way more destructive.
So here's our game plan. We're going to break down what it really means when a country can't pay its debts. We'll look at how they get into that mess, the domino effect it has on real people, the super tough road to recovery, and then we'll ask the big question, can even the world's richest countries face this kind of disaster?
Okay, first things first, let's get the language right. Countries don't technically go bankrupt. The proper term is default. And it all boils down to one single, incredibly fragile thing: trust.
So what is a sovereign default? It's actually pretty simple. It's when a government misses a payment or says they're going to be late or just flat out announces they're not going to pay. See, there's no international bankruptcy court for countries. Nobody comes to repossess the capital city. It's really just a government breaking a promise.
And this, right here, is the absolute heart of the matter. The country itself doesn't disappear. What shatters is the trust, the confidence that investors, other nations, and even its own people have in the government. That just evaporates. And that's when the real crisis kicks into high gear. Because once that trust is gone, trying to borrow more money becomes almost impossible. And that means you can't import the stuff you absolutely need, like fuel to keep the lights on or medicine for your hospitals. In really bad situations, a country might even be forced to give up control of its own stuff, like when Sri Lanka had to lease a major port to China just to deal with its debt.
So how does a country even find itself in this nightmare scenario? I mean, sure, corruption and bad decisions are often part of it, but there are some classic economic traps that can pull a nation right down the path to default. A lot of the time, it starts with this vicious cycle, the debt trap. A government borrows a ton of money, way too fast. Pretty soon, a huge part of its budget isn't going to schools or roads, it's just paying interest. So to keep from sinking, they have to take out new loans just to pay off the old ones. It's like a high-stakes version of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and eventually, the money runs out.
But there are other triggers too. A big one is when a country borrows in, say, US dollars. If their own local currency suddenly gets weaker, the size of that debt just balloons overnight. Or you could have a huge economic shock. Think about Venezuela. Its whole economy was built on oil. When oil prices crashed, its income just vanished, which led straight to hyperinflation and default.
And then, sometimes, believe it or not, it's a political move. It's done on purpose. Back in 2008, the president of Ecuador just decided that some of the country's debt was illegitimate, so they defaulted. Not because they couldn't pay, but because they wouldn't. It just goes to show you that default can be used as a political tool. A default might start as a headline about government finance, but it definitely doesn't stay there. It sets off this devastating chain reaction that crashes right into the daily lives of ordinary people. And the terrifying part is how fast it all happens. One missed payment, and boom, the next day credit ratings are slashed. Within a week, investors are panicking and yanking their money out of the country. A month in, the currency has crashed and you've got hyperinflation. And then people rush to the banks to get their money out, which can cause the whole financial system to just collapse. Let's just pause on that word, hyperinflation. This is where prices don't just go up, they explode. Sometimes every single day or even every hour. The money you have in your wallet today might be worth half as much tomorrow. Your entire life savings could be wiped out in just a few weeks. It's a true economic nightmare.
And this all adds up to a staggering human cost. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about empty shelves in grocery stores, life-or-death shortages of medicine, power cuts all the time, people's bank accounts get frozen, businesses have to close, which means jobs are lost. And as you can imagine, this almost always leads to massive protests and social chaos.
So, after hitting rock bottom, is there any way back? The short answer is yes. But the road to recovery is almost always incredibly long, super painful, and it usually requires help from the outside, help that comes with some very serious strings attached.
Once a country defaults, it's basically cut off from all normal borrowing, so it has to turn to what you might call the world's financial paramedics. You've got the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which gives out emergency loans. Then there's the World Bank for more long-term stuff. These are the go-to organizations in a crisis.
But here's the catch. That help comes at a cost. These lenders demand something called austerity. Basically, it's a strict economic diet. Think deep cuts to things like healthcare and education, higher taxes, and selling off government-owned assets like the national airline or power company. For the people living through it, it often means even more hardship.
But even with all that pain, some countries do make it through. Argentina is famous, or maybe infamous, for defaulting again and again, but always finding a way back to the markets. Greece went through years of brutal austerity to get its economy back on track. And then you have a rare success story like Uruguay. They had a huge crisis back in 2002, but made the right moves and are now one of the most stable economies in South America.
Now, you might be thinking this all sounds like a problem for developing nations, but what about the big guys, the economic superpowers? Could a country like the United States actually go bankrupt? Well, the rules of the game are a little different at the top, but the risk is not zero. And that's really the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? With all of its debt, could the U.S. ever just not pay its bills? The answer is really complicated, and it all has to do with the very special power that the U.S. government has.
Here it is, the unique privilege. The United States borrows money in its own currency, the US dollar, which happens to be the currency the rest of the world uses for most things. What this means is that, in theory, the US can never actually run out of money because it can always just print more dollars. Now, the huge, massive risk there, of course, is that doing so could cause runaway inflation.
But the U.S. has gotten dangerously close to defaulting not for economic reasons, but for political ones. You've probably heard about the big fights in Congress over the debt ceiling. Both in 2011 and again in 2023, the political games got so bad that they seriously spooked global markets. And this perfectly proves our main point. Even the threat of a default was enough for two credit agencies to downgrade America's perfect rating. The trust was damaged.
Japan is another really interesting case. Its national debt is enormous, over twice the size of its entire economy. But it hasn't defaulted. Why not? Well, because almost all of that debt is owned by people and institutions inside Japan. Its own citizens, its own banks. Because it doesn't owe a ton of money to foreigners, it's way less vulnerable to a panic.
So in the end, when a country defaults, it's not really about the nation itself vanishing from the map. It's about the collapse of trust. A whole economy and the global system it's plugged into is really just built on a series of promises that debts will be paid. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. What really happens when those most fundamental promises are broken?